In my lifetime, I estimate that I've read over 100 books. Here's my list of the top 10 books to read if you want to become wealthier, more successful, happier, and even more creative. All right, let's jump right into it with the first book on our list, 7 Strategies for Wealth and Happiness, written by Jim Rohn. There's this idea that success leaves clues. And when you follow people that are influencing the influencers, all the names lead back to one person. But if you read Darren Hardy's book on the compound effect, or Brian Tracy's book, The Power of Self-Confidence, and if you read Tony Robbins' books, Awaken the Giant Within, they all thank this one gentleman in particular. His name is Jim Rohn. And Jim Rohn is a renowned motivational speaker and author, and he's the OG, the original gangster of self-help. And he is known for so many quotable quotes. I'll just read them to you right now to let you know the importance of this man and the way he thinks, to motivate you to read this book, The 7 Strategies for Wealth and Happiness. So here's what Jim has said. Success is not to be pursued. It is to be attracted by the person you become. So in other words, it's important to have goals, but it's more important the person you become in the pursuit of those goals. You have to acquire skills, you have to learn about discipline, and you have to be able to do certain things. And that's where the real gem is. It's not the goal itself, but how you transform in the pursuit of that goal. Here's another gem that Jim said. Work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Most of us spend almost all of our available resources to work for someone else to make their dreams happen until we're like middle-aged and we realize this is not my beautiful life. So what should we be doing? We should be working hard on our job, do a great job, give them the best that you can give, but you need to save something in the reserve tank for yourself so that you can build your own dreams. Because if you're not building your dreams, you're busy building someone else's dreams. I'm going to end this part with this quote, and it's excellent. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. You've heard people like Gary Vee say something like, get rid of one loser friend. I wonder where he got that idea from. See, so when you go back to the source code like Jim Rohn, you're understanding the idea as it was first articulated. And maybe you have to go back to biblical times in order to find where he may have drawn inspiration from. But I like going back to the source, and Jim Rohn is the man. The next book on my list is The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay-Stanier, or MBS, with whom I've had the pleasure of talking to. The Coaching Habit is a strange title because you would think it's about wanting to be a coach. And maybe it's mistitled, but it didn't matter because it's a best-selling book. It's sold over 1 million copies. So can 1 million people be wrong? I don't think so. There's a premise in The Coaching Habit that when we are quick to give advice, we do a couple inadvertent things. Now, in our mind, we think we're helping people out. We're being sharp, efficient, and valuable by providing answers. But what we don't realize is we create a system where people become dependent on us for answers. It robs them of the ability to think for themselves, to problem solve, and to have agency or autonomy over their lives. So he suggests and urges people to be slower to give advice, to be curious for a little bit longer, and to ask a few more questions. And then wonderful things can happen. Now, in the book, he gives you this excellent framework called the 7 essential questions to ask. So questions like, what's on your mind? What's the real challenge for you? To drive deeper, more productive conversations with the people you're talking to. Now, I believe, hot take, The Coaching Habit is one of the best sales books that you can buy. Because if you apply the framework and have conversations with your prospects, you'll find that there's a lot less friction. You're helping them to articulate what they want, get clarity on their goals, and to outline what obstacle stands in their way. What could be better for a sales conversation than learning those things? And I'll go as far as to say that this book will not only teach you how to be a better coach, to be a better sales, but to improve all aspects of your life. Because at the core of it is our ability to communicate with other people. So if we ask big, beautiful questions that are open-ended and we listen and stay curious longer, don't you think that'll improve all levels of our understanding of one another? Book number 3 on the list is probably the book that I refer to the most, hands down, bar none, is The Win Without Pitching Manifesto, written by Blair Enns. The book is written in a manifesto style. There's 12 proclamations. But the summary of it all is that we're so busy as creative people pitching ideas that we never really learn how it is to actually win clients. So the title seems like it's one of these clickbait titles, like The Win Without Pitching. How is that even possible? Because we were taught we must pitch, we must perform, we must present. So this is a giant slap to all that and say, stop it. Ask questions, dive deeper, And this is how you derail the pitch process itself. One of the biggest ideas that you can draw from the book is using a form of cognitive bias called anchoring. Anchoring is this idea that we all rely too much on the first piece of information that we get. So when you're talking about price in a negotiation, it's very important that you anchor high, that you say a big number or you talk about a big value before you talk about price. Because if you talk about price, the clients become obsessed with that. Here's the example of how you would apply this in real life. When the conversation inevitably leads to how much do you charge, you should say something like this. For clients like you, projects like this cost between $20,000 to $55,000. And so what you've done is you've bracketed and anchored at quite a high price. So the clients are contemplating between 20 to 50,000, the middle of which is about 35K. And they'll sit there and they'll think about that for a while. And the next thing that you need to do is be totally silent. You say that big number and you just be quiet. Count to 3 if you need to, as Blair suggests, and then see what the client says. They might say, well, Chris, 50 is a lot. And you nod. And then they might come back and say, can we do something for less? When you say, how much less? They say, what about 42? Because that's the upper limit of what we can afford. And then you can say, well, let me see what we can do. I'll work on a proposal. But now you know they're willing to spend 42-ish. And this probably, in all likelihood, is way more than what you would have asked for if you just told them a price without anchoring. That's the power of anchoring, everybody. The next book on the list, Delivering Happiness, written by Tony Hsieh, the former founder of Zappos, profoundly shaped the culture of my company. So what I really love about this book is that Tony shares ideas about how to build a healthy company culture built around creativity, weirdness, and empowering people to make decisions in the best interests of the company and the customer. And the principles are so clearly defined in this book, and most of them cost little to no money, but it allows you to take action to live your values. Legend has it that an irate customer was calling because they're getting married the next day and they're expecting their shoes to arrive the day before. And when they hadn't arrived, they called in a panic state and talked to a customer service rep. And then the customer service rep was empowered to make a decision to act, not to have to send it to management or read from a script. So here's the crazy part. They said, when is your wedding and where is it? So then they proceed to tell them it's going to be on a certain day at a certain time. And they say, don't worry, we'll take care of you. This customer service rep got the shoes, hopped on a plane, and delivered it to the groom at the wedding ceremony. How crazy is that? And then got right back in a cab and went home. Now you would think the shoes cannot be that expensive, and they're not. The amount of time and energy that was spent getting the shoes to the customer far exceeded by an orders of magnitude. But what happened there was they created a customer for life. And what's the best thing? Every single person was now going to be a Zappos customer because the groom was going to tell everyone about the extent in which they went to make sure that they were going to have an amazing day, an unforgettable day. So when we drill it down to what can be applied, we literally copied the core values from Delivering Happiness, modified it a little bit, and started to live by them, to hire and to fire our team based on this. And it took us probably a year and a half before we were able to change our culture around. So what happens is when you start to live by your values, people start to quit, and then you have to ask a couple of people to leave. But what you're left with is an amazing team that's aligned around your values so that you don't have any more of the drama that you don't desire. The next book is going to throw everyone for a WTF moment. Like, what? It's called Understanding Comics, written by Scott McCloud. Now, you don't have to be into comic books or narrative sequential art to really get tremendous value from this book. I read this book when I was in college, and it opened my mind to so many different things. So an art form that is mostly considered things for children and adolescents to read is an extremely powerful hybrid medium itself. When you mix images with words put in a sequence in a very specific way, you create this very special and unique art form. The biggest thing I got from reading Scott McCloud's book on understanding comics is what happens between the frames. So in one frame, you have someone saying, don't drink and drive. And the next frame, you see a tombstone that says RIP, rest in peace. What happens in there? So he uses the term closure. Like, you know how like when something bad happens between you and friends and you don't have closure? What's happening in your mind is between these two frames, you're telling yourself a lot of story that's super efficient and powerful. It allows each and every one of us to figure out the narrative that happens between point A and point B. And it's something that I use a lot in storytelling. So if you want a good, fun read and you don't want to get into all the serious business stuff, read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. The next book on my list is How to Deliver a TED Talk by Jeremy Donovan. Many years ago, I was asked to speak at a conference. It was considered like TED Talk for the motion design industry. And it was run by a woman named Elaine. And Elaine had a very specific point of view on how we're supposed to give these talks. And her bar was very high. It needed to be short, it needed to be concise, and you need to memorize it, something I'm not used to doing. And this was still very early on in my public speaking career where I got the butterflies like you could not believe. So I went through this book, and I want to warn you about this book, okay? When you study and break down the very best talks ever given on a platform, it can create a lot of imposter syndrome, as you can imagine. So in the book, he goes through some of the most popular, most viewed TED Talks ever in the history of TED and breaks them down for you. One key idea that he shares in the book is to have a good catchphrase. Start with why. Leaders eat last. I don't know why I'm giving all the Simon Sinek ones, but you know what I'm talking about. Or even Ted's thing, ideas worth sharing. This allows you to create a very memorable, short, and hooky thing so that after you're done talking, people can walk away with something. It gives you that definitive note. Now, many of us will give a presentation or a talk and we'll have the leaky tire syndrome where the air is just escaping from the tire and we run out of energy. When you have a good catchphrase, you know how to end it and you know how to land your story and your presentation. If you want to have a better talk, start at the end and then work your way backwards. The next book on my list is Influence, surprise, surprise, written by Robert Cialdini. So Cialdini goes into deep research in this book and he studies how people behave. And there's some crazy ideas in it, but one of the biggest ones that was just like mind-blowing to me is the idea of reciprocity. Now, reciprocity is like a complicated word, right? Reciprocity, what does it even mean? To reciprocate. When somebody does something for you, you feel compelled to return the favor. So society develops because we agree to cooperate with each other. Now, there are edge cases to this, but most people don't feel good when they're just takers. They just take, and they never reciprocate. They have to return the favor. They have to balance the scales of giving and receiving. Now, in the book, he cites a specific study that the Hare Krishnas, who are a religious group, they basically exist on donations. That's how they're able to maintain their organization. So the Hare Krishnas would go around and gift people books, and they would give it to them, and the person wouldn't even want the book, but they would take it, and then shortly thereafter, they would ask them for a donation of some sort. And then people would reach into their pocketbooks and their purse and hand over some money. And then what the Hare Krishnas realized is if they follow the people, they don't want to carry a book, they would just throw it in the trash. And they would go in the trash and pick it out and give it to the next person. Because they knew if you started by giving somebody something, they're more likely to give you what you want. So once they realized this, they realized carrying books are heavy, they're expensive. So they moved into just giving people flowers. So if you're ever at the airport or at a popular tourist destination, beware what's happening. So when people give you something, they want something back. Now, the interesting thing that happens here is because this is overused that we've become numb to this. We'll either say no outright, or when we take something, we don't give them anything because we understand the game that they're playing. This is the power of reciprocity and just one of the 7 principles inside of influence that could help you to understand human dynamics and psychology. The next book on my list is written by Marty Neumeier, and it's called Zag. Zag is not the first book, probably not even Marty's best known book, but I think it's one of his best books. Zag shares this idea that branding is really about not being different, but being radically different. And in this world, that's all that matters. Branding is the act of intentional differentiation. Different is better than better. That's a Sally Hoghead's quote. And this is going to be your competitive advantage. In the book, he shares this framework called your onlyness statement, the thing that only you can do, your brand's unique value proposition into the world. Read this book, apply it to your business and your personal brand. The next book on my list is Reworked, written by Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansen. Rework is an examination into how we need to rethink work. And there's a big, beautiful idea in the book. Think like a chef. Okay. So many of us are so protective of our secret sauce, our recipes, how we do things. In fact, there's a friend of mine who's an amazing designer, illustrator. And I mentioned to him, you should teach people how to do what you do. It's mind blowing to me that you can do this so fast and the quality of what you do is so amazing. And he said to me, Chris, I don't want to create a bunch of clones of what it is that I'm doing. I don't want to compete against myself with poor copycats. I understand his sentiment. In fact, you might be watching this thinking to yourself, I don't want to do the same thing either. I don't want to build clones. Here's the problem. Let me reframe it to you by asking this question. Who are the most famous, celebrated, and successful chefs that you know? You might say Emeril Lagasse if you're from a specific time period. If you watch a lot of TV, you might say Gordon Ramsay, he of Hell's Kitchen and Kitchen Nightmares fame. Or you might say Bobby Flay, Boy Meets Grill, and Iron Chef. Now, why is it that they're the most celebrated, well-known, and successful chefs? Because they've done a really good job of sharing their secret sauce. So the book talks about think like chefs. Create recipes for what it is that you do. Step-by-step instruction on how to achieve this. Compile in a book. Sell the book. Take it even further. Create a show, a YouTube channel, a TV show, and teach people how to make those dishes. Both things will create tremendous demand for you to cook for people. Because what we realize is as much as we love watching people do things, very few people actually take action to apply it themselves. And we watch something done by a master, we want to then have the master do it for us. So if you want to get busy being the world's best kept secret and hoarding all the resources yourself, do so at your own peril. But I would rather share all my recipes, think like a chef, and become like Bobby Flay or Gordon Ramsay. Last but not least on my list is the book Steal Like an Artist, written by Austin Kleon. Steal like an artist, what does that mean? Well, Picasso once said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And he stole that from someone else. So there you go. Now, in creative culture, in our circles of friends, peers, and mentors, stealing is a bad word. In fact, we're dealing with a lot of that on scales we've never seen before. A lot of us are critical of artificial intelligence, generative imagery, because it is built on models of looking at art that it did not own or have rights to. That's a topic for another day. But we're sensitive to this because no one wants to have their work stolen, or so we think. But what we don't realize is all of us are stealing subconsciously and not in ways that most of us would deem as unethical or improper. For example, if you went to school, if you looked at a book, if you watch any work from any other artist, why are you looking at that work? You're looking at that work for quote unquote inspiration, to see how they render an image or how they handle lighting or combine media. This is what you're doing. And when you're in school, the way we're taught to draw is to literally copy the masters, to sit down with a sketch pad and pencil and to copy as faithfully as we can, not to emulate, but to copy as faithfully as we can how that artist looked at the world and shaped it. Our proximity to that great piece of art determines our future potential. And it takes an incredible amount of work to be able to do something very close to someone else. Now, if we just stop there, that would be the end of that story. But what we can't help do is to copy and then somehow put our own spin on it, because that's just the nature of how we are. We'll say, instead of rendering it this way, instead of lighting it this way, I'll do it a little bit differently. That in copying, we learn how to grow. And this is a big part of culture. If you think about popular music, pop music, it is a combination of many different sources. In fact, some of our most beloved artists have stolen from different cultures, remixed it to advance it, to move forward. This is how we grow as a society, in art, in culture, and everything else. Kirby Ferguson put out this video called Everything is a Remix, where he goes through an extensive process of deconstructing popular culture and art. And he emphasizes the same concept in Austin Kleon's book, Steal Like an Artist. What we do is we copy first, we transform the work, and we combine it with other things and then create our own take on this. In this way, we move the culture and the art form and our communities forward. So many of us are afraid to copy work to our own detriment. We're not busy studying and copying faithfully what is happening before, So what we wind up doing is doing a really bad imitation. And to me, that's the biggest insult. So in conclusion, nothing is really, really original. You got to get over it. All creativity is borrowing ideas, remixing them, putting your own spin, adding your voice. Everything is a remix, everybody. Now that's my top 10. So word of caution here. Reading can only get you so far. Reading is not going to make you rich, successful, happy, more self-confident, more creative. It's actually when you apply these ideas into your work, into your life, that you're actually going to move forward. Personal development doesn't work if you actually don't do any of the development. So reading is great, but taking action is better.